"You're fired, Sienna Marlowe," Zachary Fields said, his voice cutting through the open office like a blade meant to draw blood. He didn't pull me aside. He didn't lower his tone. He stood there in the middle of the floor, arms crossed, chin lifted, making absolutely certain that everyone within earshot heard every syllable. A few heads turned, keyboards went silent, screens stayed lit, but nobody was actually working anymore. "This organization needs velocity," Zachary continued, savoring the moment. "And you're the anchor dragging us backward." I looked at him steadily and said, "Repeat that." He smiled, sharp and condescending. "You resist progress. You cling to antiquated operational frameworks. And you simply don't align with the aggressive expansion model we're implementing." Zachary reminded everyone within listening range that the executive committee had hired him as chief operating officer to revolutionize the company. I was granted complete authority to restructure leadership. He said that includes eliminating obstacles. Obstacles, that's what he called me. I asked who authorized this termination. He waved his hand like the question was beneath acknowledgement. "This isn't a negotiation," Zachary said. "Operations departments always resist evolution. That's precisely why they get replaced." The word hung there, replaced, heavy and intentional. I was the director of operations and infrastructure. I built the frameworks that kept this place functioning when ambition exceeded capability. I negotiated the property agreement, stabilized expenditures, and designed processes that prevented minor failures from becoming catastrophic collapses. When this organization was still held together with temporary solutions and prayers, I was the one keeping it upright. Zachary had been here 7 weeks. He nodded toward it, already standing nearby. "Disable her credentials." My access badge stopped responding before I could surrender it. My inbox refreshed once, then locked me out entirely. Someone said quietly, "You'll need to clear your workspace now." Zachary looked satisfied. "We're accelerating," he said. "That's the future." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. Pack slowly. My planner, my charging cable, a photograph from the year we finally turned profitable. Around me, the office returned to motion. The relief of not being next mixing with quiet unease. Before I left, I opened my phone and sent a single email to the executive committee's administrative coordinator. No context, no explanation, just a subject line. "Notice of contractual adjustment effective tomorrow." Zachary Fields thought he had just cleared an obstacle. He had no idea what he destabilized. "Before this goes any further, take a second. How are you holding up today? If you're heading outside later, make sure you bundle up and stay warm, and let me know where you're listening from. If this story is hitting close to home, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Because what Zachary set in motion doesn't end here. Accelerates. Years erased in seconds. By the time I reached my car, the anger had settled into something heavier. Not explosive, not dramatic, just a slow, grinding pressure that came from watching years of contribution dismissed with a wave of someone else's hand. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I sat there long enough to remember exactly how we got here. This company almost collapsed 9 years ago. Cash flow was hemorrhaging through bad property agreements, bloated supplier contracts, and operational shortcuts that looked inexpensive until they failed spectacularly. While executives debated branding strategies and vision presentations, I renegotiated everything that kept the lights on. I cut operating expenditures without cutting capability. I restructured service agreements, extended payment schedules, and stabilized margins long enough for revenue to recover. That wasn't strategy theater. That was survival. When we outgrew the old facility, I chose the current site myself. I walked it with engineers, inspectors, and attorneys. I signed the agreement after 8 months of negotiation, locking in terms that gave the company flexibility when growth stalled and leverage when it didn't. No one questioned it then. They were too busy celebrating expansion. Zachary Fields never saw any of that. He came from financial consulting, the kind where confidence matters more than consequences. He spoke fluently in charts, benchmarks, and urgency. Every problem looked like excess. Every delay looked like incompetence to him. Operations weren't a foundation. They were overhead. I heard it in the way he talked about my department. Facilities people are always replaceable, he said once, smiling like he'd made a clever observation instead of an insult. Kept my expression neutral. I'd learned that reacting only made people like Zachary louder. In meetings, he questioned why we needed redundancy, why systems were built to last instead of scale fast. He praised lean models and mocked caution. When something worked quietly, he ignored it. When it cost money visibly, he targeted it. That was his idea of leadership. What hurt most wasn't the dismissal. It was the erasure. The way years of responsibility were reduced to a line item. The way competence was treated like resistance. I swallowed it all because responding emotionally would only confirm his narrative. What he never did was read past the summary pages. He skimmed contracts. He trusted assumptions. He believed authority replaced understanding. He confused speed with competence and disruption with intelligence. People like Zachary always did. Sitting there in my car replaying his words, I remembered the clause buried deep in the lease documents, the one tied to governance changes, the one no consultant ever lingered on. Zachary thought he had cut a cost. He had no idea what he had just activated inside the structure of everything. Clarity arrived after the noise faded. Anger gave way to arithmetic, and that was where I was strongest. The clause they missed. I didn't rush. I opened the files I knew by muscle memory. The ones I'd assembled quietly while everyone else chased speed. The building everyone called headquarters never belonged to the company. Couldn't have not then. When we signed the agreement, the balance sheet was fragile and lenders were nervous. Ownership would have killed the deal. So, I structured a joint venture, a clean property entity with patient capital and strict governance. Controlled it. The company leased space from it, arm's length, fully disclosed, approved by council, and renewed twice without comment. I remembered the weeks of negotiation like they were yesterday. Inspections, contingencies, abatements, escalation caps. I wrote the operating schedules myself because I knew how failure traveled through a building. Cooling, power, access, redundancy, the lease mirrored operations, not the other way around. That detail mattered. Buried past the summary's Santa Claus, everyone skimmed. If a change in executive control materially altered operational structure, rent could be adjusted to market within 24 hours' notice. It wasn't punitive. It was protective. A guardrail against reckless leadership that treated infrastructure as expendable. Legal signed it. The board approved it. No one argued because no one expected it to be relevant. Zachary didn't read that far. He never did. He trusted briefs and decks and authority letters. When he talked about cutting facilities, he assumed contracts were inert. He assumed ownership equaled leverage. He assumed wrong. The timing mattered. Earlier that morning, Zachary circulated a memo titled Corporate Restructuring Authority. Looked harmless, procedural, empowering. He signed it and had the chairperson countersign. With that signature, he formally altered governance in a way that directly affected operations. He did it to move fast. He did it to look decisive. I watched the pieces align without emotion. The joint venture's rights were clear. The notice window was clean. Market comparables were current. I didn't need permission. I needed precision. I drafted the notice once, then again, cutting adjectives until only facts remained, addressed properly, delivered correctly, effective tomorrow. Control isn't loud. It's quiet and documented. By the time I closed the folder, the outcome was no longer a possibility. It was a process already underway. I stayed calm because calm keeps edges sharp. Every step followed paper, not pride. The lease allowed adjustment. The authority triggered it and the market set the number. Nothing personal, nothing rushed, just cause and effect. Zachary believed control came from titles. I knew it lived in signatures, clauses, and timing. Tomorrow would prove which belief actually governed reality. I had prepared for this outcome for years. Don't leave yet. The next part is where everything starts to shift. Leverage quietly activated. Precision matters when pressure rises. I didn't write the message in anger. I wrote it the way contracts are meant to be activated, clean and narrow. No commentary, no accusations, just the mechanism doing what it was designed to do. The email went out at 10:30 addressed to the property lease administrator. The subject line was neutral, almost boring. In the body, one paragraph stated the adjustment. Effective in 24 hours, base rent would increase by 300% recalculated to current market benchmarks. A second paragraph cited the clause section and page number. That was all. I added recipients carefully. Every voting board member, the chief financial officer, internal legal counsel, no drama, just visibility. If anyone wanted to claim surprise later, the record would disagree. Within minutes, my phone started vibrating. I didn't answer. I knew the first calls would be noise. Panic always arrives before comprehension. The CFO left a voicemail voice tight. Sienna, this has to be a mistake. Call me immediately. Legal followed more controlled. We've received your notice. Reviewing now. I stayed still. I opened the lease again, scrolling slowly. Not because I needed reassurance, but because repetition sharpens confidence. The clause was exactly where I remembered it. Clear trigger language, clear remedy, clear timing. An hour later, legal called back. This time the tone was different. We've reviewed the notice, the attorney said. Complies with the lease terms. I asked one question. Is it enforceable? There was a pause, then a careful answer. Yes, it is. That was the moment everything shifted. By mid-afternoon, Zachary's number lit up my screen. I let it ring. When I finally answered, he didn't bother with greetings. What the hell is this? He demanded. You can't just triple our rent. I didn't, I said. The contract did. You're trying to pressure the company, he snapped. No, I replied evenly. You changed governance. The clause adjusted price. That's how agreements work. He accused me of sabotage, of retaliation, of playing games. I let him finish. Then I said, this isn't personal. It's procedural. Silence followed, heavy and disbelieving. I ended the call and set the phone face down. The leverage was no longer theoretical. It was active, documented, and acknowledged by legal. Nothing I did after that would change the outcome. The mechanism was engaged, and the company was now moving on terms it had agreed to long before Zachary arrived. From that point forward, every decision inside those walls would be constrained by math, contracts, and time, not slogans or authority. And I intended to let that reality apply steady, unavoidable pressure until consequences reached the people who believed speed replaced responsibility entirely. Panic behind closed doors. Chaos doesn't arrive loudly at first. Leaks. The morning after my notice went out, Zachary Fields proved that faster than any spreadsheet ever could. My phone rang before sunrise, his name flashing like a warning. I let it ring, knowing silence would irritate him more than any answer. When I finally picked up, he exploded. You think this is clever, he shouted. You're trying to destroy the company. His voice cracked between anger and panic. The sound of someone realizing control was slipping. He threatened lawsuits, personal liability, blacklisting. I said nothing until he paused for breath. Then I replied, read the lease. He hung up. Inside the company, confusion spread quickly. The CFO discovered what Zachary never bothered to confirm. Relocation wasn't possible in the short term. The lease on every potential alternative space required months of approvals, inspections, and capital commitments they didn't have. Worse, several major client contracts explicitly tied service continuity to the registered operating address. Move the building. Breach the deal. I heard the CFO say it over speaker during a frantic call. We can't just move. He said the address is locked into compliance filings. Someone asked how long they had. His answer was blunt. Not long. Zachary tried to project confidence. Anyway, he called an emergency meeting and declared the rent adjustment temporary noise. He told executives to stay focused and accused me of overplaying my hand. Behind closed doors, his confidence collapsed. Emails flew. Calendars filled with red exclamation points. No one had a solution that didn't involve time they no longer controlled. By mid-afternoon, the bank called. Not Zachary, not legal, the bank called finance directly. "We're reviewing your exposure." The relationship manager said a sudden cost increase of this magnitude raises liquidity concerns. That sentence changed everything. The moment the word liquidity entered the conversation, panic went public. Credit terms tightened. Vendors asked for reassurance. One quietly requested prepayment. Zachary started calling again, his tone shifting from threats to bargaining. "We can talk," he said. "You don't have to do this." I listened, calm and detached. This wasn't escalation. It was consequence unfolding exactly as designed. The company wasn't collapsing because of me. It was unraveling because Zachary mistook authority for understanding. The chaos he felt wasn't an attack. It was exposure spreading faster than he could contain, and it had only just begun. I knew the pressure would force decisions, and decisions would reveal competence or its absence. Zachary had chosen speed over structure, volume over detail. Now, every unanswered question multiplied. I stayed silent, not out of fear, but patience, letting the system respond exactly as it was built to respond, without urgency, without mercy, without intervention. If you were me at this moment, what would you do? Leave a comment below. Desperation makes mistakes. Pressure makes people reckless. By the second day, Zachary Fields stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding and went straight to confrontation. He wanted a reversal and he wanted it fast. Called first. The director spoke carefully, like every word was being recorded. "Zachary has requested we issue a clarification. She said he wants it stated that you no longer hold any operational authority connected to the company." I didn't raise my voice. "You don't," I replied. "I'm not an employee." There was a pause. Paper shuffled. "He's insisting that your actions constitute abuse of control." She continued. "That you're leveraging insider influence." "Ask him to define insider," I said. "Then call me back." 10 minutes later, Zachary called himself. "You're overstepping," he snapped. "You don't get to weaponize assets against the company." "I'm enforcing a contract," I said. "One you're bound by." "You're acting like you still run operations," he shot back. "Char agrees you don't." "I agree," I said calmly. "Which is why conflict of interest doesn't apply." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "My lawyers are drafting papers as we speak. You'll be sued for interference." "Good," I said. "Make sure they read the separation timestamp." That shut him up for half a second. Legal confirmed it later that afternoon. My attorney called with the kind of tone lawyers use when things are clean. "You're no longer an employee," he said. "You have no fiduciary duty to the company. Exercising rights as a controlling party in a property entity does not constitute interference. So there's no conflict." "Ask none," he said. "They don't have a case." Zachary didn't like that answer. He tried a different tactic. He pushed HR to circulate a memo questioning my authority retroactively. Something vague enough to scare junior staff but meaningless legally. Backfired. Legal flagged it within minutes. "Do not distribute," they wrote. "Unsupported and inaccurate." That's when he rushed. In his panic to regain leverage, Zachary approved a supplemental agreement tied to short-term liquidity relief. He didn't read it closely. He delegated review to a junior associate and signed electronically to keep things moving. The document referenced the lease adjustment as uncontested, locking it into financial forecasts and compliance filings. He handed me proof without realizing it. When I saw the signature, I felt nothing dramatic, just confirmation. He had validated the adjustment in writing while trying to escape it. That wasn't strategy. That was desperation. Zachary called one last time that evening, voice tight. "We can still fix this," he said. I answered honestly. "You already made it worse." Silence followed. The kind that means someone is finally realizing the fight they picked was never about force. It was about precision. And they had already lost control of it. The collapse goes public. Collapse doesn't announce itself with drama. It spreads through invoices, calendars, and quiet decisions. By the third day, the consequences of Zachary's choices moved faster than anyone could contain. I watched it unfold without comment, not out of cruelty but clarity. The first cracks came from suppliers. Long-time vendors began requesting prepayment before shipments. One email read, "Given recent volatility, revised terms will apply immediately." Another followed within minutes. Then another. What Zachary had dismissed as temporary noise was now altering trust, and trust is expensive to rebuild. Operations felt it. Next, 2 senior managers resigned within hours of each other. No speeches, no ultimatums, just short notices citing instability and personal reasons. They had reputations to protect. Staying meant explaining decisions they hadn't made. Leaving was quieter. Clients noticed before leadership admitted anything was wrong. A major account paused its renewal, asking for assurances that service continuity wouldn't be disrupted. Legal couldn't provide them. Compliance filings listed the headquarters address. Any uncertainty around that address triggered review. Pause spread. One delay invited another. Zachary tried to rally confidence. He sent emails about resilience and momentum. They were ignored. Meetings ended early. Cameras stayed off. People don't need instructions when they sense gravity shifting. The company's posture changed from aggressive to defensive in less than 48 hours. Finance tightened approvals. Procurement stalled. Every decision waited on another decision that never arrived. Momentum, Zachary's favorite word, vanished. Then the board stepped in. An emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening. Invitations went out quietly, precise and selective. I received one. Zachary did not. His name was absent from the agenda entirely. No presentation slot, no opening remarks, just a note stating attendance was limited. That was the moment the collapse became official. I didn't celebrate. I observed systems fail in predictable patterns when leadership confuses authority with understanding. Remove the wrong person, stress the wrong structure, and the damage cascades without emotion. Here's the lesson I carried forward. Power isn't proven by how fast you act, but by how well what you touch survives after you do. Zachary moved quickly. The organization couldn't keep up. Nobody asked me to intervene. Nobody could. The system was past correction mode, running on inertia, and clauses already triggered. Calls overlapped. Documents revised themselves. And silence replaced authority. This wasn't revenge. It was math catching up line by line. Consequence following decision with no room left for negotiation. Nothing here required emotion, permission or escalation anymore from anyone at all. By the time I joined the call, the company was already bracing for impact. The chain reaction was complete. All that remained was accountability, and it was arriving without mercy. Boardroom without him. When the boardroom doors closed, the noise finally had a shape. Not panic, not anger, focus. The kind that settles when consequences become unavoidable. I took a seat without greeting anyone because greetings would have implied negotiation. Zachary spoke first. He always did. This situation was created by a former employee acting in bad faith, he said, eyes fixed on the table. She's exploiting legacy access to harm the company. No one interrupted him. I waited until he finished, then slid 3 documents across the table. I won't editorialize, I said. These speak clearly on their own. The lease came first, highlighted sections, clean tabs, signatures intact. I explained who owned the property, how the structure had been disclosed, and when the board had approved it. No embellishment, just dates and initials. Next came the email chain, timestamp notices, delivery confirmations, and legal acknowledgments. Each message showed notice, response, and validation. The timeline was linear, boring, and airtight. Finally, the clause Zachary never read. The adjustment language was short, unemotional, and precise, triggered by governance change enforced by market benchmarks, executed within contract. Zachary shifted in his chair. She's twisting intent, he snapped. This was never meant to be used like this. I looked up. Intent doesn't override language, I said. You didn't just fire me. You destabilized the ground your strategy stands on. That landed. The room went quiet, not stunned, but settled. Few board members nodded. One stopped taking notes entirely. Zachary tried again. We needed speed, he said. She resisted change. She protected continuity. I replied. You removed it. The chair cleared her throat. Zachary, we've reviewed the documents independently, he said. Legal has confirmed their validity. Zachary leaned forward. So what, you're siding with her? This isn't sides. She answered. It's governance. She paused, then added. Zachary, please step outside for a moment. His head snapped up. Excuse me. Now, she said calmly. Zachary stood, anger flashing across his face, but he said nothing. The door closed behind him without ceremony. Inside the room, the air shifted. Someone exhaled. Another straightened their papers. The meeting continued without him. And for the first time since this began, the conversation felt balanced. Order returned. Not because anyone raised their voice, but because facts had finally been allowed to sit where authority used to be. I sat still, hands folded, watching the system correct itself. No speeches followed. No apologies offered. The board didn't need emotion to reach alignment. They needed clarity. Zachary's absence said more than any vote could. Decisions moved faster without him. In that room, justice wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, measured, and irreversible. And everyone there understood the difference. It marked the end of impulse leadership and the quiet return of accountability the company had been missing for far too long. Order restored, power removed. When the vote concluded, there was no applause, just a brief pause. Then the board chair spoke with deliberate calm. Zachary Fields is removed effective immediately. Cited for governance failure and material risk exposure. The words were clinical, unemotional. Exactly how accountability sounds when it finally arrives. Zachary didn't argue. He stared at the table as if it had betrayed him. Then he stood and walked out without another sentence. No escort, no speech, no dignity salvaged. The door closed softly behind him, and with it went the frantic energy that had poisoned every decision he touched. Order returned almost instantly. The CFO straightened his notes. Legal began outlining next steps. Someone asked about vendor communications. These were real questions, operational questions, the kind that signal recovery instead of panic. I listened, detached but attentive, watching the company settle back into rhythm. The chair turned to me. We'd like to discuss the lease, she said carefully. The adjustment is valid, but we're hoping to renegotiate terms. He nodded. I'm open to a conversation, I replied. Not a rollback. There was no pressure, no threats, just recognition. They understood now that leverage wasn't aggression. It was preparation meeting consequence. We discussed timelines, benchmarks, and safeguards. The numbers softened, the structure improved. Stability returned one clause at a time. Someone finally asked the question they'd been circling. Would you consider returning? The chair said in an operational capacity. I shook my head. No, that answer surprised them more than the rent increase ever had. I explained without bitterness. I had already served. I had already built. What I wanted now was distance, not authority. Control didn't require a title anymore. We finalized a revised lease framework before adjourning. Fair terms, clear oversight, no shortcuts disguised as vision. The company would survive. Stronger for having learned the cost of arrogance. As I left the building, nothing dramatic happened. No one followed. No one applauded. That was fine. Justice rarely announces itself. It settles quietly like a system returning to spec after a long deviation. Zachary Fields believed leadership meant momentum without friction. The board believed governance meant protection without ego. I believed contracts told the truth long after people stopped listening. Walking away, I felt satisfaction without triumph. The structure held. The damage stopped. Order had been restored. Not because someone won, but because reality had been allowed to take control again exactly where it belonged. It was enough to know the system corrected itself. I didn't need recognition, credit, or revenge. I needed proof that preparation outlasts impulse. As the company recalibrated, I moved on, certain of one thing. When structure is respected, justice doesn't shout. It works. That understanding was worth more than any title I ever held. And it stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Cold justice, silent win. Peace arrived quietly after the meetings ended. No follow-up calls, no victory laps, no urgency. Just documents moving through proper channels and decisions being implemented without spectacle. That calm told me everything I needed to know. Within a week, the board approved revised lease terms. The rent was no longer punitive, but it was firm. Transparency was written into every page. Reporting requirements, audit access, and escalation triggers replaced vague authority. Most important, the language granting any executive full restructuring power was removed entirely. No more unchecked transformations. No more vision without accountability. I signed the new agreement without ceremony. It wasn't a concession. It was a correction. The company needed stability, not saviors. The lease would now do what it was always meant to do. Enforce discipline when enthusiasm outran judgment. People assumed I'd demand a role in return, a seat, a title, leverage made visible. I didn't. Control didn't interest me anymore. Influence through structure was quieter and far more durable. I chose distance because distance keeps perspective clean. The company adjusted quickly. Vendors resumed normal terms. Clients lifted their pauses. Internal calendars filled with routine instead of crisis. Nobody mentioned Zachary's name. Systems don't mourn removed components. They rebalance. I walked the building one last time after the paperwork cleared. Not to reminisce, not to inspect, just to confirm what I already knew. The place felt stable again. Predictable, boring in the best way. This wasn't revenge. It was alignment restored. I hadn't raised my voice, issued threats, or demanded apologies. I had relied on preparation, patience, and language written long before emotions entered the equation. Nothing else needed proving. The leverage had done its work quietly, completely. What remained was a functioning organization and a clear boundary between leadership and ownership, one defined by contracts instead of personalities, by limits instead of ego that lasted longer than any executive mandate ever could. As I left, I felt no need to look back. Outcomes don't require witnesses. The truth had already settled into the foundation. Zachary thought he ran the company. I owned the floor he stood on. The lesson that stayed, what stayed with me wasn't the win. It was the quiet moment when I realized preparation outlives power. I didn't raise my voice or chase revenge. I trusted the work I'd done when no one was watching. The clauses I'd read when others skimmed. The patience to let systems speak. Living through it felt less like triumph and more like breathing again. Steady, grounded human. The truth is most people underestimate how much power lives in the details. In the boring sections of contracts. In the maintenance of relationships that don't look strategic until they suddenly are. In the quiet decision to protect infrastructure when everyone else is chasing growth. Zachary saw operations as overhead. I saw them as the foundation. He moved fast. I built to last. When the collision came, speed didn't win. Structure did. There's something clarifying about watching a system you built prove its worth without you having to defend it. The lease didn't need my voice. The clauses didn't need my emotion. The timeline didn't need my urgency. Everything I had prepared years earlier simply activated when the conditions were met. That's the part no one teaches you about justice. It's not loud. It's not immediate. It's not even satisfying in the way people imagine. It's procedural. It's patient. It arrives when the numbers align and the documents speak, and the people who ignored the foundation finally feel its absence. I learned that power isn't about being irreplaceable. It's about building something so well that removing you creates a cost others can't afford. Zachary thought firing me eliminated a problem. What he actually did was remove the person who understood how everything connected. The building, the vendors, the clients, the compliance requirements, the contingencies, the timelines. I didn't hold the company hostage. I just stopped protecting it from itself. And when leadership confused authority with understanding, the consequences arrived exactly as designed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the structure I built demanded accountability from everyone, including me. That's the difference between leverage and sabotage. Leverage is documented. It's agreed upon. It's transparent. It just waits quietly for the conditions that activate it. Sabotage requires deception. Leverage requires preparation. Zachary never understood that distinction. He thought every constraint was an obstacle. Every process was resistance. Every safeguard was fear. He believed moving fast meant breaking things. I knew it meant respecting the things that hold everything together. When he removed me, he didn't eliminate resistance. He eliminated the person who built in the capacity to absorb disruption without collapse. The rent increase wasn't punishment. It was the cost of that capacity suddenly made visible. And the company had already agreed to it. They just didn't realize it until the clause activated. That's the part that stayed with me. Not the satisfaction of watching someone fail. Not the vindication of being proven right. It was the quiet confirmation that the work I did when no one was watching mattered more than any performance I gave when they were. I built systems that outlasted my tenure. I wrote clauses that protected the organization from its worst instincts. I structured agreements that enforced discipline when leadership abandoned it. And when the moment came, none of it required me to be angry or loud or present. Just work. That's the lesson. Not revenge, not justice in the dramatic sense. Just the slow, inevitable consequence of preparation meeting recklessness. Zachary moved fast. The structure I built moved inevitably, and inevitability I learned is far more powerful than speed. Where I am now, months have passed since I left that building. The company stabilized. Leadership changed again, this time with more caution. The board learned what happens when you prioritize charisma over competence. I didn't return. I didn't need to. I consult now mostly for organizations that have been burned by leaders like Zachary. Companies that confuse disruption with progress. Teams that learn the hard way that speed without structure is just chaos in motion. I help them rebuild. Not dramatically, not quickly, just systematically, the way infrastructure is supposed to be built. I teach them to read past the summaries, to respect the boring parts, to understand that the clauses no one reads are often the ones that matter most. And I remind them that the people who maintain systems are just as important as the people who envision them, maybe more so, because vision without maintenance is just aspiration. And aspiration doesn't keep the lights on when cash flow tightens and vendors demand payment and clients pause renewals. Operations does. Infrastructure does. The quiet, unglamorous work of making sure everything connects properly. That's what survives leadership changes and market shifts and strategic pivots. Zachary taught me that by trying to erase it. And in trying to erase it, he proved how essential it actually was. I don't think about him often. When I do, it's without bitterness. He was a symptom, not a cause. The real problem was a system that valued his confidence more than my competence. That mistook his speed for capability. That belief disruption was inherently valuable. Organizations make that mistake constantly. They hire the loudest voice in the room and call it leadership. They reward the person who promises the fastest growth and call it vision. They dismiss the people who ask hard questions and call it progress. Then they act surprised when the foundation cracks. I'm no longer surprised. I've seen it too many times. What surprises me now is how predictable it all is. How often the same patterns repeat. How rarely people learn from collapses they didn't experience firsthand. But that's why the work matters. Someone has to build in the safeguards. Someone has to write the clauses. Someone has to respect the details. And if that someone gets dismissed, those safeguards need to activate automatically. That's what I do now. I help organizations build systems that protect themselves from their own worst instincts. It's not dramatic work. It's not fast. It won't make headlines or win awards, but it's the work that lasts. And last thing I've learned is the only victory that actually matters. Final thoughts. He stayed with me to the end. Thank you. Which detail hit you the hardest? Was it the clause? The moment Zachary realized what he triggered. The board meeting where his confidence finally cracked. And where are you listening from right now? Yes. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're lessons wrapped in narrative. They're reminders that competence doesn't always look impressive and confidence doesn't always mean capability. If this resonated, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done differently. Tell me if you've seen a Zachary in your own workplace. Tell me if you've ever been dismissed by someone who didn't understand what you actually did. I read every comment, not because I need validation, but because these stories matter to people who've lived them. A like or share helps this reach someone who needs it. Someone sitting in their car right now replaying a dismissal, wondering if the anger they feel is justified. It is. And subscribing means you won't miss the next story. 'Cause there are more. There are always more stories about people who built things quietly, got dismissed loudly, and let structure do the talking. That's what happens when preparation meets arrogance. That's what happens when someone mistakes the foundation for an obstacle. That's what happens when you fire the person who actually holds everything together. The building doesn't collapse immediately. It just starts charging what it's actually worth. And by the time leadership realizes the cost, the invoice is already due. Epilogue. The email I never sent. There's an email I drafted the night I was fired. I never sent it but I kept it. Said, Zachary *, you asked me once why we needed redundancy, why we built systems to last instead of scale fast, why I resisted your changes. ***, I didn't resist change, I resisted recklessness. ***, the difference matters, but you never stayed in a room long enough to learn it. You believed authority replaced understanding. That confidence could substitute for competence. That speed was the same as direction. You were wrong. ***, the clause you're discovering today isn't revenge. It's consequence. It's the cost of dismissing the person who understood how everything connected. ***, you didn't fire an obstacle. You removed the foundation. And now you're learning what happens when the ground beneath your strategy starts charging market rate. This isn't personal. It's structural. I hope your next role teaches you the difference. Hannah, I never sent it because it wasn't necessary. The clause said everything that email could have said and it said it more effectively. Words can be dismissed. Contracts can't. That's the lesson I carry forward. Not that revenge is sweet. Not that justice always prevails. But that preparation executed quietly and documented thoroughly speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Zachary wanted speed. I built for inevitability. And inevitability doesn't need an email. It just arrives exactly on schedule with all the appropriate documentation attached. That's power. Not the kind you announce, the kind you build so carefully that by the time anyone notices it, the outcome is already decided. I didn't need to send that email. The lease sent it for me. And that more than anything else is what I want you to remember from this story. The most powerful thing you can do isn't winning an argument. It's building a system where arguments become irrelevant, where the truth is documented, where consequences are pre-agreed, where accountability activates automatically when conditions are met. That's not revenge. That's architecture. An architecture unlike anger lasts. The question I get asked most, people ask me if I regret it. If I regret structuring the lease that way, if I regret triggering the clause, if I regret not just letting it go and moving on, the answer is no. Not because I enjoyed watching the company struggle. Not because I wanted Zachary to fail, but because accountability isn't optional. If organizations are allowed to dismiss competence without consequence, they'll keep doing it. They'll keep hiring the loudest voice. They'll keep rewarding confidence over capability. They'll keep moving fast and breaking things until something breaks that can't be fixed. The clause wasn't punishment. It was a teaching moment. The company learned that infrastructure has value. That operations aren't overhead. That the people who maintain systems deserve the same respect as the people who envision them. They learned it the expensive way, but they learned it. And the next time someone suggests firing the person who keeps everything running, someone in that boardroom will remember what happened when they did. That's not revenge. That's education. Expensive education. But some lessons can't be learned any other way. So no, I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Zachary never bothered to read the documents he was bound by. I regret that the board didn't ask harder questions before giving him unchecked authority. But I don't regret protecting the structure I built. I don't regret enforcing the agreements everyone signed. I don't regret letting consequences arrive. Exactly as they were designed to arrive. Because if I had walked away quietly, what would that have taught anyone? That competence is expendable. That preparation doesn't matter. That the people who build foundations can be dismissed without cost. Better that the lesson lands hard and clear. Respect the people who hold things together or pay the price when they stop. That price was 300%. But the lesson was invaluable. And I hope every organization that hears this story learns it before they need to pay for it themselves. To everyone still holding things together, if you're reading this or listening and you're the person who maintains the systems, who reads the boring parts of contracts, who asks the hard questions that slow things down, this is for you. You're not the obstacle. You're the foundation. And foundations don't get celebrated until they're gone. So document everything. Read every clause. Build in protections that activate automatically. Create systems that enforce accountability even when you're not there to defend them. Because one day someone like Zachary will arrive. Someone who confuses speed with competence. Someone who sees your caution as resistance and your thoroughness as fear. And when they dismiss you, not if, but when, you want to make sure the structure you built speaks for itself. Not with anger, not with confrontation, just with consequences. Arriving exactly as agreed. Enforced by documents signed long before emotions entered the equation. That's not revenge. That's professionalism. That's what it means to build things that outlast your tenure. And if you ever find yourself sitting in a car after being dismissed, wondering if the years mattered, wondering if anyone will notice you're gone, trust the work you did when no one was watching. Trust the clauses you wrote when everyone else skimmed. Trust that structure built properly defends itself. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to be vindictive. You don't even need to be present. You just need to have been thorough. And if you were, the outcome is already decided. The invoice is already drafted. The timeline is already set. All that remains is for reality to catch up with confidence. And it will. It always does. The last thing I'll say, Zachary Fields taught me something valuable, though I doubt he intended to. He taught me that the opposite of power isn't weakness. It's visibility. Real power operates quietly. It's embedded in structures. It's written into agreements. It activates automatically when conditions are met. Loud power, the kind Zachary wielded, announces itself. Demands attention. It requires constant reinforcement. And the moment it stops being loud, it disappears. But quiet power, the kind built into systems and clauses and documented processes that lasts, doesn't need you to defend it. It doesn't need you to be in the room. It doesn't even need you to be employed anymore. Just works. And that's the kind of power I choose to build now. Not the kind that impresses people, the kind that protects them. Not the kind that wins arguments, the kind that makes arguments irrelevant. Not the kind that gets celebrated, the kind that gets results. Zachary wanted to be remembered. I wanted to build things that worked. In the end, only one of those goals mattered. The building still stands. The lease still functions. The company still operates. And somewhere, buried in the documents, no one reads, the clauses I wrote are still there. Quiet, patient, waiting. Ready to activate the moment someone mistakes the foundation for an obstacle again. That's legacy. Not a nameplate, not a title, not a speech at a retirement party. Just systems that work long after you've stopped watching them. That's what I built. That's what survived. And that's what I'm most proud of. Not the rent increase, not the board meeting, Not even Zachary's removal. Just the quiet confirmation that the work I did when no one was paying attention mattered more than any performance I gave when they were. That's enough. That's always been enough. And if you take nothing else from this story, take that. Build things that work without you. Write agreements that enforce themselves. Create systems that demand accountability automatically. Then walk away knowing that if someone tries to dismantle what you built, the structure itself will defend its own existence. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just mathematically, inevitably, exactly as designed. That's power. That's justice. And that's how you make sure that even when you're dismissed, you're never actually gone. Because the foundation you built, it's still there and it's still charging rent. Where you can find me. I don't do social media much anymore, but if you want to reach me if you have questions about building protective structures into your own work, or if you just need someone to confirm that what you're feeling after dismissal is valid, leave a comment. I'll see it. Or better yet, take what you learned here and build it into your next contract, your next lease, your next agreement. Make sure that the next time someone confuses confidence with competence, the cost arrives automatically. You don't need revenge, you need structure. Build it well. Document it thoroughly. Then trust it to work. It will. And when it does, you won't need to say a word. The invoice will speak for itself. Thank you for staying until the end. Now go build something that lasts. Santa Marlo.